27 young men and women, full of life, embarking on one last adventure before entering adulthood. Then they vanished without a trace. No phone calls, no bodies, just silence. For 22 years, the story of the class of '99 was little more than a terrifying urban legend, a warning whispered around campfires. That was until one hiker stumbled upon a rusty school bus in the woods, covered in moss, full of moldy yearbooks and something else. Something no one was prepared for. June 3rd, 2021. Siskiyou National Forest on the Rogue River, Oregon. An experienced hiker, off the beaten path, spotted a strange yellow object through the trees. Thinking it might be old equipment or a ranger station, he approached to find the wrecked shell of a school bus. Half swallowed by the forest, the number on the side almost unreadable. Inside, time seemed to have stopped. Dusty backpacks still strapped to the seats. Faded Polaroids, a cassette player lying on the floor, warped by moisture, pages from a yearbook stuck together with mildew. But in the very back seat was a pile of clothes, and underneath it, an unmistakable human jawbone. When investigators arrived, they immediately linked the discovery of the bus to one of the most eerie, unsolved cases in Oregon history, the disappearance of Forest Grove High School's graduating class of '99 during their senior trip. But the deeper they dug, the more impossible it became. There was no record of the bus being rented. No security camera had recorded its entry, no roads nearby, and inside were the personal belongings of nearly every missing student. Some items were untouched, but others were placed deliberately, like a message or a ritual. What had happened on that bus was no accident, and what the forest had kept secret for more than 2 decades was more than a tragedy. It was a secret no one was meant to find. The hallways of Forest Grove High School hummed with the electric energy of graduates on the threshold of freedom. Locker doors slammed, laughter echoed through the halls, and the teachers wore the tired smiles of people counting down the days. It was May of 1999, and graduation was just around the corner for the class of '99. Amid the sea of navy blue caps and gowns preparing for the big day, 26 students stood out. Not because they were exceptional, but because they were close. A tight-knit group that had grown together over the years through shared classes, broken hearts, inside jokes, and Friday night games. Lacey Munro walked gracefully down the hall, clutching her binder to her chest. She was everything her parents had hoped for: top student, student body president, future Ivy Leaguer. Her father, Mayor Thomas Monroe, never missed an opportunity to mention her accomplishments during town hall speeches. But those who knew Lacey well saw the pressure behind her perfect smile. The late-night study sessions, the panic attacks hidden behind bathroom doors. Not far from her, Jared Fields burst into the video room, camera in hand, narrating his own mockumentary about high school. Jared was the jokester of the class. Bold, relentless, sometimes pushy, but there was a sharpness in his eyes that few noticed. He planned to turn camping into his final project, a time capsule of their last week together. "It'll be like the Blair Witch Project, only funnier," he joked. Tyrese Hall towered over most of his classmates, his shoulder pads long since replaced by the proud weight of a full-time football scholarship to Oregon State. Everyone expected great things from Tyrese. His coaches, his classmates, especially his mother. But with each scholarship offer, the fear grew. What if he failed? What if the best years of his life were already behind him? Then there was Emily Tran, a girl whose presence was often marked only by the quiet scratch of a pencil on paper. Her sketchbook never left her side, filled with portraits of classmates who never knew they were drawn and forest scenes she said she dreamed of. She rarely spoke unless spoken to, but when she did, her words remained. Emily wasn't quite part of the group, but somehow they all trusted her. When the final bell rang on Friday afternoon, the school came alive with celebration. Someone put Green Day's Good Riddance on their car stereo. Teachers were handing out final permission slips, and talk of an upcoming trip to the Rogue River dominated every conversation. June 5th, 1999. It was supposed to be a celebration. 27 seniors from Forest Grove High School had been planning their senior trip for months. After finals, College acceptance letters and years of small-town monotony, this trip was their moment of freedom. The destination, a remote campground nestled deep in the Siskiyou National Forest on the Rogue River. Isolated, picturesque, and far from parental supervision, curfews, and rules. They set off that Saturday morning on a yellow school bus driven by Mr. Harold Griggs, a substitute driver who had taken over for a regular driver who had called in sick the night before. The departure was cheerful. Students waved to their families, backpacks filled with snacks and sleeping bags. A few parents captured grainy video footage of laughter and screams and a group photo just before boarding. It was the last anyone ever saw of them. That evening, one of the mothers, Mrs. Elsie McClure, received a voicemail at 6:41 p.m. It was from her daughter, Rachel. Muffled laughter in the background, someone yelling, "Turn it off!" Then a pause and silence. No goodbye, no disconnect, just static. When the bus failed to check in at the campsite that night, it was first assumed they were delayed. The weather had turned bad. Foggy. The roads through the forest were narrow, barely paved, and steep. Parents called, but no one answered. By Sunday morning, panic had set in. Search and rescue teams were dispatched. Helicopters scanned the area. Dogs led to dead ends, but there were no tire tracks, no cell phone signals, and no broken branches to follow. The campground ranger confirmed that the yellow school bus had not arrived. The bus and its occupants had simply disappeared. On the third day, search parties expanded the perimeter. A week later, a local fisherman spotted something strange near a bend in the river 15 miles from the main road. A disposable camera, half buried in the mud. The casing was cracked and water damaged. When investigators opened it, they found it empty. The film inside had been removed. 10 days later, another mystery emerged. Mr. and Mrs. Callahan, whose son Trevor was among the missing, received a letter in the mail. No return address, no postmark, just 5 words written in shaky handwriting. "We've arrived. Please stop looking." At first, the note gave them hope, but handwriting experts examined it. The crooked letters weren't right. The pressure was inconsistent. It looked like Trevor's handwriting, but not quite. The final verdict, probably a fake, possibly a sketch. Still, the note sparked rumors. Some said the children had faked their disappearance. Others whispered of cults or strange rituals in the woods. Some believed the students were still alive, in hiding, but the facts remained the same. There was no trace of the bus, the driver, or the 27 students. No witnesses came forward. No one was ever found, and after 2 months, the case was quietly closed, listed as an unsolved disappearance. But the parents never stopped searching. Some walked the wooded trails every year. Others posted photos on missing persons bulletin boards. And one father, Robert Vasquez, kept a journal documenting every theory, every strange clue, every sleepless night. He once wrote, "I don't think they went off the road. I don't think it was an accident. I think something took them. Something that didn't want to be found." He never explained what he meant, and no one ever contradicted him. 21 years passed. The hallways of Forest Grove High School echoed with the sounds of new students, new laughter, and new memories, but the shadow remained. A plaque by the entrance bore the names of 27 students, etched in bronze beneath the words, "Gone but never forgotten." Class of 1999. The school held a memorial every June. Teachers lit 27 candles. Some took early retirement, unable to bear the weight of unanswered questions. Others remained, haunted by the faces they once taught, faces that would forever remain young in their minds. All across town, time didn't move much faster. Bedrooms once filled with teenage posters and textbooks and colognes were untouched. Beds were made the same way. Dress trophies and half-finished journals waited on shelves, as if their owners had just stepped out and might return at any minute. Some parents clung to hope like oxygen. Others sank into a quiet grief. The kind that didn't scream but simply settled. Mr. Delaney, whose son Matthew was at the top of his class, spent most days at the local library, reading his son's latest essay over and over. Mrs. Santos, whose daughter Nina played on the school's soccer team, watered the same garden Nina had planted weeks before the trip. She never touched a petal, but no one held on tighter than Lacey's mother, Irene. While others buried their hope over the years, Irene honed hers and grew determined. She refused to mark a grave, refused to sign any legal declarations of death. She kept Lacey's toothbrush in a glass, her answering machine greeting remained the same, and her bed was freshly made each morning. "She's not gone," Irene said. "I don't know where she is, but she's there. I can feel it." The neighbors called it denial. Her family called it grief. It was almost noon on June 3, 2021. A hiker named Travis Milner, a retired firefighter from Medford, Oregon, decided to explore a seldom-used trail system deep in the Siskiyou National Forest on the Rogue River. He was looking for nothing in particular, just solitude and silence. But after a few hours, pushing through dense underbrush far beyond the marked trails, he saw something strange. A flash of yellow, almost completely buried under brush and rot. As he cleared away the ferns and dead vines, a shape began to emerge. Metal windows, cracked rubber tires buried deep in the earth. It was a school bus, rusted and broken, its hull distorted and buried by years of growth. The number on the side was faded, almost erased, but barely legible. Number 57. The door was jammed, swollen with weather and time. He forced it open, coughing as stale air rushed out. The interior was a tomb. Dust and mildew clinged to every surface. The seats were torn. Ivy grew through the broken windows. And on the floor, rotting but still recognizable, there are school bags, jackets with emblems, and a couple of moldy graduation caps. A jacket with the Forest Grove High School crest hangs limply on the edge of the seat. In the back, under collapsed overhead racks and rubble, he spots bones, not one set but several. Some are fully skeletonized, others partially decomposed. It takes him a moment to process what he's seeing. There are multiple sets of human remains. 17, it will later be confirmed. He immediately calls 911. Within hours, the scene is cordoned off by police. Investigators, forensic experts, and anthropologists flood the scene. And just like that, a mystery that went cold in 1999 reignites. The media pounces. Families who spent 22 years in grief or hope are forced to relive it all. Investigators begin to catalog the contents of the bus. Most of the items are weather-damaged, some destroyed beyond recognition, but in a tattered, mildewed backpack stuffed under the driver's seat, they find something unusual. A craft folder, soggy but still intact. Inside are hand-drawn sketches, charcoal and pencil, signed in the lower corners by Emily T. Emily Thompson, one of the missing graduates. Her body is not among the remains found. The sketches are eerie, disturbing. One shows a ring of figures standing in a forest clearing, surrounded by a fire. Another shows faces hidden behind crudely painted masks, blank, expressionless. Another sketch, darker and more frenzied, shows blood dripping from tree branches, forming a circle on the forest floor. Symbols are scrawled in the background, none matching a known language. Some pages appear to have been ripped or torn from a journal. The final sketch in the folder shows what appears to be a school bus, but different. It is surrounded by tall, faceless silhouettes. And in the front window, behind the steering wheel, is a mask. Investigators identify the remains using dental records and DNA. Of the 28 people reported missing, 26 are students and 2 teachers. 17 bodies have been recovered, but 9 students remain missing, as are both teachers, including Mr. Carl Muse, the AP history teacher, and Miss Janine Crawford, the chaperone. The discovery destroys any remaining theories that the class simply ran away or died in a crash. The bus is too deep in the woods, and there is no road wide enough for a vehicle that size to pass without leaving tracks. There are no roads nearby, no tire tracks. It didn't crash there. It was placed there, hidden. Why only 17? Where are the others? And why was Emily? A quiet student who barely spoke in class, drawing scenes that looked like rituals. Investigators search a half-mile radius, but the dense terrain slows the search. There are no tracks, no remains outside, only silence and the weight of something they can't fully explain. The case reopens not just as a search for bodies, but as a possible crime scene. Foul play is suspected, and when the sketches hit the press, a new theory emerges, one far darker than anyone had ever considered. What really happened to the class of '99 in those woods? And who, if anyone, planned to ensure they never returned? Within days of the discovery of a school bus in the Oregon woods, the police station and the town were awash with news vans, investigators, and concerned citizens. The state was abuzz with mystery. What happened to the class of '99? What did the bones found inside the rusted school bus mean? And why, more than 2 decades later, has nothing come to light? Then, on the morning of June 10th, a nondescript figure walked into the Bend police station. An early morning fog hung in the air, and the fluorescent lights of the station hummed with a mundane monotony, until the door swung open and a man walked in. He was thin, so thin he seemed almost frail. His face was unshaven, his clothes were ragged, a threadbare jacket hanging loosely on his bony shoulders. His long, wild hair was plastered to his face as if he hadn't brushed it in years, and his eyes, sunken with fatigue, glanced around nervously. The officers, who had been absorbed in their own discussion about finding the bus, fell silent when they saw him. The man seemed oblivious to the sudden change in atmosphere. He walked slowly, almost methodically, to the front desk, then leaned forward, his voice barely audible as he whispered, "I'm Jared Fields, class of 1999. For a moment, no one moved. The words hung in the air, charged with the weight of 22 years of unanswered questions. The officers exchanged confused glances as if waiting for a punchline, but there was none. This couldn't be real, could it? The last time anyone had heard the name Jared Fields was when he, along with his entire graduating class, disappeared on their senior trip. The body was never found. No trace of it. One of the officers, Sergeant Emily Wells, stepped forward cautiously. "Mr. Fields, can we see your identification?" Jared didn't answer. Instead, his eyes darted nervously around the room, like a man who was constantly looking over his shoulder. "I was never supposed to come back," he muttered, his voice shaking. "They're still watching." A chill ran down Sergeant Wells's spine. "Who's watching, Mr. Fields?" she asked, her voice tight with suspicion. Jared shook his head, as if trying to clear away the thoughts that clung to him like a heavy fog. I don't know. I was never supposed to come back. None of us were." He sounded less like a man who had simply survived something tragic and more like a man who had been forced to survive. A man marked by something dark and unnatural. Sergeant Wells's patience was wearing thin. She needed answers. They all wanted answers. "Mr. Fields, we need you to tell us where you've been all these years. We need to know what happened to your friends, to the other students." Jared's eyes darted nervously. He glanced at the door, as if he were afraid someone might be listening. "I can't. Not yet. Not yet. Not yet." He stopped, swallowing hard, as if the words themselves were poison in his throat. But before anyone could press further, a forensic scientist walked into the room with a report. The officer quickly handed it to Sergeant Wells. She read it quickly, her brow furrowed in disbelief. "Jared Fields, your fingerprints are a match. Your DNA is a match." For the first time since entering the station, Jared looked up, his eyes wide as a man who had just been given the death sentence. "I told you," he whispered. "I told you I was never supposed to come back. I wasn't supposed to come back." The officers stared at him in stunned silence, trying to process his words. They had expected a man who would explain the mystery, who would give them answers. Answers to the disappearance, to the school bus, to the bones. But instead they had gotten a man who seemed more of a puzzle, a man whose presence only deepened the mystery. "Mr. Fields, what do you mean you weren't supposed to come back?" Sergeant Wells pressed, her voice calm but insistent. "Where have you been all these years? Where did you go? What happened to your classmates?" Jared's face twisted in horror. He stepped back from the counter as if trying to distance himself from the question, from everything. I can't tell. Not yet. They're still out there. They won't stop watching until this is over." A cold, oppressive silence filled the room. The officers looked at each other, unsure what to do. The man they had expected to provide closure, to give them the truth, was now shaking with fear. And then, as suddenly as he had appeared, Jared Fields turned and headed for the door. "I can't stay here," he said. "They'll find me if I stay here." Sergeant Wells rushed to stop him. "Mr. Fields, please, you have to—" But before she could finish, he was gone. The door slammed behind him, and the officers were left with more questions than before. Now they had a living witness, Jared Fields, the only one who could explain what had happened to the class of 1999. But whatever had happened to Jared, whatever had happened to the others, was far from over. The nightmare was not over. It was just beginning. Days later, Jared sat across from investigators, his eyes wide with terror, a haunting look that had not faded over the years. The room was silent, the air thick with anticipation. The last 2 hours had been spent painstakingly piecing together his timeline, his memories, his reconstruction of the last time he had seen his classmates. But now, in this crucial moment, he was going to tell them everything. "They're all dead, you know," he began, his voice shaky but determined. "The ones who didn't, the ones who fought back. They were never seen again, never heard from again, just gone." Jared paused, his hands shaking slightly as he wiped them on his pants. He'd been sitting in front of investigators for hours, but the weight of his confession had never felt so real, so suffocating. His words had already begun to reveal a decades-old secret, but this was the moment when the truth would finally come out. "It started the day the bus broke down," he continued. "We were miles from the nearest road, deep in the woods. The engine sputtered and died. We couldn't move the bus. We couldn't start it, so we waited and waited." Jared's voice shook as he recounted the memories, the dissonant sounds of the forest creeping back into his mind. "That's when they found us." He leaned forward, his gaze fixed on the investigators. They were in those clothes, gray, like they lived in the dirt. I think they called themselves the Chosen Ones. They said they came from a self-contained refuge, a place of peace, a refuge from the outside world. They assured us that the world was crumbling, that society as we knew it was disintegrating. Jared shook his head, his gaze falling to the floor. "It sounded like a joke, but we were trapped. No one had a signal on their phones, and none of us had any idea how to fix the bus. So we followed them. We had no choice." The investigators exchanged glances, their faces impassive but focused. Jared spoke with increasing urgency now, his voice rising as the story poured out. "At first, the community had been peaceful. It seemed almost too good to be true. They gave us food and told us we could rest. They promised us everything we needed. They cared for us and gave us shelter. The air there felt different, like I had a weight, like everything around me had slowed down. But after a while, everything began to change." Jared paused again, his breath catching in his throat. They began to talk about re-education, about how we needed to let go of our old lives, our past. We were forbidden to say where we came from, what we were running from. They said we had to forget. They called it purification. The word hung in the air like a warning. Jared's eyes flickered with something like fear, something darker than just memory. "They gave us food," he continued, "but it tasted funny. Something was wrong, like we were being drugged, our senses dulled. Some of us started having vivid dreams, nightmares that felt too real, too intense. And then they started making us sleep in shifts, very strict, very specific. They wanted to know when we were awake and when we were asleep. It didn't matter if you were tired. You had to follow the schedule." He rubbed his eyes, clearly exhausted by the memory. "Some of the kids started to fight back. They couldn't stand it. They wanted to leave, but they were afraid. They were terrified of what would happen if they didn't comply. I saw some of them try to escape. I heard their screams as they were led into the woods. They were never seen again. The room was dead silent, the words hanging in the air like an ominous fog. Jared's lips trembled as he spoke again, his voice growing quieter. They told us they were the chosen ones. The world ended outside these woods. All that remained was their community. They said we were chosen to live in a new world, to be part of something bigger, but it wasn't a choice. It was a prison, and those who didn't accept it, he swallowed, his throat dry. They were sacrificed. Jared's eyes flickered with a cold, distant fear. I wasn't the only one who saw it. Those who tried to leave, those who resisted, were sacrificed to the woods. None ever returned. The investigators sat motionless, drinking in every word. Jared continued, "By 2006, I couldn't take it anymore. I found a way to escape. I ran as far and as fast as I could, but even then I was afraid to tell anyone. I kept quiet. I hid. I thought maybe if I kept quiet, they would forget about me, that I could move on with my life." Jared's gaze darkened. His voice dropped to a whisper. "I thought I was the only one, but when I heard they found the bus, I knew. I knew they hadn't forgotten. I needed to tell someone. I needed to tell you all the truth." Silence fell over the room. Once again, the weight of Jared's words weighed on everyone present. The investigators were stunned. What he had just described was no ordinary disappearance. It was a conspiracy, a cult, and it took the lives of 27 young people. Lives that were re-educated, controlled, and sacrificed for something darker than anyone could have imagined. Jared escaped, but his classmates were not meant to be. They had been chosen for a purpose, and the forest, the very forest that had hidden their remains for decades, held the final, horrifying truth. The world they had been told about had not disappeared. It was waiting for the next generation to take their place. When Jared first reached out, reactions were mixed. Some parents hung on his every word, hoping for answers, desperate for closure. They believed him. His story made sense in a way the authorities couldn't explain. But others, especially the families of the missing students, refused to believe him. They couldn't reconcile the image of their children with the grim picture Jared painted. To them, he was simply a survivor, a man whose mind had been twisted by the horrors he'd endured. The divisions within the community deepened. In the months following his return, some families openly blamed Jared for their children's deaths, while others saw him as a victim of the same tragedy. His credibility was questioned from all sides. The media celebrated him, calling him everything from a hero to a lunatic. But Jared never wavered in his resolve. He knew the truth, and it was worse than anyone could have imagined. Jared was soon placed into protective custody. The police couldn't risk him being silenced by those who still believed their children were out there, waiting to be found. They had no idea who to trust. There was too much unfinished business, too many unanswered questions. The role of the militia, the strange events in the woods, the missing students, none of it fit together. But Jared's story, as disturbing as it was, provided a chilling glimpse into what had really happened. Months later, Jared published a memoir recounting his experiences and his disturbing journey through the heart of those woods. The book became a sensation, sparking new theories about the class of '99, the militia, and the twisted events that had unfolded in the woods. Some people believed every word of it. Others dismissed it as the ramblings of a broken man. But one thing was clear. Jared had seen something beyond human comprehension, something no one would ever fully understand. The aftermath of the disappearance of the class of '99 remained an open wound in the community. The forest still held its secrets, and the answers lay buried deep beneath the moss and vines, waiting for someone brave enough to uncover them. Jared's memoir became a symbol of both truth and madness, a final, terrifying chapter in the story of the students who vanished without a trace. As for the families of the missing, they were left to pick up the shattered pieces of their lives. Some continued to search for their children, convinced they were out there somewhere. Others, like the families who had always supported Jared, were left with only the grim knowledge that their loved ones had never truly returned. The forest that had taken them And the truth was far darker than anyone could have imagined. Months had passed since Jared's memoir was published, and the hype surrounding the class of '99 had not died down. The story still hung in the air, a shadow over the community, with families torn between hope and despair. Some were convinced Jared had made it all up, while others believed he had only scratched the surface of something much darker. Jared had become a recluse, only showing up for interviews or meetings with authorities. But one cool, overcast afternoon, he headed back to Forest Grove High School, a place that had once been filled with laughter, the bright future of the class of '99, and the promise of summer adventure. It was a memorial now, an empty reminder of what had been lost. He stood alone in front of the memorial dedicated to his classmates. Polished stone slabs etched with the names of each student who had disappeared. The plaque gleamed in the dim light, a symbol of the emptiness that had consumed the town. Jared knelt down, pulling something out of his jacket, a faded, mildewed yearbook. He opened it carefully. The pages were yellowed with age. There, on the back, was a note that only he could have written. He placed it carefully in either yearbook, under the cover, so it wouldn't be found unless someone looked closely. The note read, "We tried to leave. I was the only one who got away. I'm sorry." For a long moment, Jared just stared at the memorial, the weight of his grief and guilt weighing on him like the forest itself. He felt the memories of the lost, the faces of his friends, their laughter, and the terrifying last days of their journey. And then, without a word, he turned and walked away, leaving behind only a yearbook and an eerie message for anyone brave enough to seek the truth. Some say Jared made it all up, created a story to explain the nightmares that never left him. Others say the truth was even darker than he claimed, that what happened in the woods was something far worse than anyone could have imagined. But one thing is clear. What happened to the class of '99 still haunts the trees of Oregon. Leave a comment below and let us know. Do you believe Jared's story, or is there something even more disturbing still lurking in the woods? Hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on the bell for more incredible real-life mysteries.